Well, greetings, advisory and technical committee members. We want to put together this brief overview video of our next meeting to hopefully save more time at our meeting for discussion. We're sending you quite a bit of information prior to the meeting in terms of draft land use concepts and also the draft plan principles. So the purpose of this video is to give you a little bit of context of those and also give you a little bit of background on where we are in the process. So we'll jump right in. So we're at stage 3 of our planning process, developing the draft master plan, very much an iterative part of the planning process where we're throwing things out, getting feedback, revising, modifying, editing as needed. Besides our committee meetings on July 9th, we'll have our next open house likely mid-August, and then we hope to have our actual draft master plan document by the end of December. So that's kind of where we're headed in the process. A little bit of background, it's been a while since we've met back in January, but we've been busy since then. A key thing was the April virtual open house, and then also the listening sessions in different parts of the county following up from that April virtual open house. So a key part of that April open house was the results of the scenario planning and looking at impacts of 3 growth scenarios of current trends, city-focused or rural growth, and how to accommodate 37,000 potential new housing units in Boone County by 2050. So the results of our analysis showed that, based on current trends or rural growth, the amount of land being used for those 37,000 units could be well over 50,000 acres. But a more city-focused approach could really cut down on that amount of acres, looking at perhaps 20, 25,000 acres. And so the listening sessions, we wanted to get feedback on those scenarios, on our criteria review of those. And for the most part, I think folks really understood in terms of the benefits of that scenario 2 city-focused approach. So we use that feedback to start then developing both the plan and principles of the plan and also the draft land use concepts. So later on in the presentation, I'll walk you through the land use concepts. But this is, again, one of the key things we want your feedback on with this round of committee meetings. We've also pulled together 7 draft principles for the plan, and then goals with each of these. And again, this is the second document that you have in your email that we'll want feedback on. A little bit of background in terms of the role of the master plan. The master plan itself is a policy document, and the future land use plan is really also a policy document. We talked at the April open house about how the master plan informs other detail efforts, components of either the county or partnering organizations. You'll see as you read through the plan principles and goals, we start to recommend perhaps other countywide or organizational detailed plans to come forward out of this master planning process. And then also the land use plan also then starts to inform things like the county zoning, county subdivision and development regulations. It's important to remember that the land use plan in and of itself is not a detailed description of kind of regulatory prescriptive aspects. Again, it's a guide to help develop those or update those. So it's a little bit of a balancing act in terms of if you review any master plan, any comprehensive plan document, it's a little bit of a balancing in terms of how descriptive the land use plan and the description of those categories should be. If you look at Boone County's existing zoning, or if you live in a city, if you look at your city's zoning document or subdivision regulations, it's often many pages of text. Sometimes just the allowed and conforming uses underneath zoning descriptions. can be very lengthy. So it's a little bit of a balancing act in terms of from the master plan and from the future land use plan, how descriptive to get into. We want to be descriptive enough to help inform updates of those other documents, but without being overly prescriptive. Also kind of re-show this slide. We had shown this again at the April open house, but these were our 5 precedent counties and a kind of a snapshot of their land use plans. And I think what you see from comparing these 5 land use plans all together, you see several similarities in terms of the counties using their land use plans to really identifying areas of growth and areas of ideal levels of service in terms of community services and utilities in terms of either city areas or edge areas around those cities, and then other areas in terms of the rural areas being primarily agriculture or a mix of ag and rural residential. So you see some of these concepts, necessarily aren't new, but really they're the good planning in terms of thinking about how to use your land use plan to make good, efficient decisions in terms of public expenditures, especially for infrastructure and utilities and community services. So thinking about Boone County and the development of a land use plan and descriptions, it's also important to remember kind of where we're starting from a starting point. The 1996 future land use plan you see there on the screen on the left, very generalized, black and white a drawing, very general in its plan categories. The 1996 plan also lacks any actual land use descriptions. You compare that to some of the precedent counties. This is the land use plan for Greene County, Missouri, where Springfield is. And Greene County and several of the precedent counties, they're also pretty short in terms of some of their descriptions in terms of a land use category. So we pulled on the screen here the description for the agricultural land use description of Greene County's future land use plan. And as you see on your screen, 2 sentences, so pretty brief. And the reason why counties and communities does this too for their comprehensive plans. A lot of times, the briefer you are, the easier it is to move forward, right? I think as we are developing the descriptions for the land use concept plans for Boone County, we wanted to be more descriptive than maybe some of the present counties that we've been looking at. We feel it's important to try to give more direction, but also keeping in mind again, in some areas, perhaps being a little broader without being overly prescriptive. So you'll see we've organized the land use descriptions in basically kind of this kind of standard format for each land use category. That for each category we have an overview, uses and development density, and then the 6 categories to the right in terms of kind of a description of these topics, which I think are the most important topics that we've heard from residents throughout the process. And this also acknowledges too that Boone County is a big county. There's different needs, different priorities in different parts of the county. So a housing mix or transportation with different land use, it varies from different land uses. I'll also highlight, the community services and utilities category. The land use plan also tries then to use the land use plan to be clear in terms of expectations, in terms of community services and future utility provisions. I'll also remind this at the end too. We're asking that take a brief survey before our next meeting on the 9th. You can do that before July 5th. We know that next week is 4th of July, kind of a shorter week, but the more folks that can take our brief survey, the better that we can kind of maybe respond to some comments at our meeting on July 9th to make that meeting more productive. So I'm going to jump into the draft land use plan and kind of show you, kind of walk you through the draft land use categories, for the draft land use plan. And again, at this point, everything is still very much in progress draft that we're looking at feedback on. So I'll kind of walk you through different categories. So first one I'll start with is what we're calling local community planning districts. So you kind of see the areas of pink kind of show up there around the cities. So this land use category recognizes the importance of local planning decisions by the local communities. It also recognizes the fact that many of these communities are already planning for their future land use beyond their city borders. So we've looked at the future land use plans of the cities that have those, and so they're already planning beyond their border. So the boundaries for these typically a half mile up to a mile from city boundaries. I think there's also an expectation, as you'll see in the descriptions, that in these local community planning districts, that these are areas perhaps likely in the future to be serviced by the communities, to be annexed in the future. So the expectation of future community services, future utility provisions. The local community planning district for Columbia is a little bit more bespoke, kind of taking into account that to the west and to the southwest, there's more kind of either existing development or development limitations. That future growth will likely occur to the north and northeast of the city. So you see kind of the same concept in terms of the local community planning for future land use in these areas, but a little bit more bespoke area for the city of Columbia. Next land use category that kind of shows up there in red is what we're calling regional economic opportunity areas. So these are areas where, in our previous analysis, we found that Centralia, Columbia, Ashland, especially, has quite a bit of opportunity to accommodate future job growth, within their cities. But sometimes the available parcel size is limited. So these regional economic opportunity areas is recognizing the need in the future for areas potentially of larger sites, and especially larger sites that take advantage of some of the unique transportation assets of Boone County, either in terms of Interstate 70, some of the rail lines, or Boone County Regional Airport. And some of these areas, again, kind of based on communities' future land use plans, overlap with some of the areas already designated for commercial and industrial development in those communities. Next land use category is conservation buffers. So this recognizes the importance of the Boone County's existing state parks and conservation areas, both in terms of visitation and overall ecological services. So conservation buffers areas are areas, not only of those state parks and conservation areas, but areas immediately kind of adjacent to those. Next category that kind of pops up there in light yellow is what we're calling rural residential. So these are areas that recognizes that there's already in many areas of the county, quite a bit of rural residential, of residential properties on larger parcel sizes, often 5 plus acres. So these are recognizing some of these areas that are already kind of in existence, and kind of an area then for future rural residential. Areas that kind of popped up now in orange, kind of along I-70 and Midway. These are unincorporated village nodes. So again, areas that are seeing some growth pressures. Areas that kind of based on the description for this category, perhaps you see some development density similar to the adjacent communities. But these areas kind of being a little bit separated from community boundaries would likely remain unincorporated and unannexed in the future. And then the final two categories are more of a preservation category. The first one is the farmland preservation land use category. And these areas kind of fall along the lines of existing agricultural zoning areas where the minimum parcel size is 10 acres. And a lot of this area kind of falls along areas where it has the most amount of prime farmland. And then the last category, you see that popped up on darker blue, rural preservation. So again, these are areas where, as you'll see from the descriptions, again, kind of rural preservation is one of the key goals for these land uses. So the document that we sent you, you'll see on this in terms of the land use concepts. So we've developed three land use concepts. So one I just walked you through was what we're calling option one, and then you see kind of on the left in terms of talks about some of the goals of the land use. Option two, very similar to option one. However, this doesn't include the rural residential category. And this option two is basically the rural preservation category covers those areas instead of rural residential. But then option three, similar to option two, however, this adds a category called highway corridor. You see they're kind of in the light brown along 63 and some other corridors in the county. So this land use category recognizes that some of the transportation corridors in the county already have development along those some of these corridors, especially rural residential along these, or could have anticipated development in the future, and recognizing the need for these corridors in terms of access management and rural view sheds being kind of important aspects to these areas then transition to less intensive uses of rural residential, rural preservation and farmland preservation. This option three also includes an emphasis on development nodes along the Colt Rail Corridor. As you see it here along kind of Route B and the Colt Corridor, some circles of orange. So these are kind of maybe recognizing the opportunity that we talk a little bit more about in the plan principles and goals about perhaps evaluating the potential of commuter rail or even commuter multi-use trail and development being spurred along with that in those areas. This slide shows in some ways kind of a breakdown of the different categories, and one of the goals of the land use plan was to balance preservation and growth areas. So you'll see on the land use plan, there's three land use categories that are considered more preservation areas: farmland preservation, rural preservation, conservation buffer. Two of the land use categories more of a transitional area, rural residential, and then highway corridor. And then three of the land use categories really being seen as the growth areas, so local community planning districts, unincorporated village nodes, and the regional economic opportunity areas. And then for each of these, there's a one-page description in terms of kind of describing what each of these categories are. So as you look through these, you'll probably see some things in terms of, oh, this makes sense. This sounds good from a general point of view. We'd like to see additional details, and part of that is intentional, right? In terms of, again, we want to provide some broad policy guidance, but then as the county perhaps updates zoning in the future, subdivision regulations in the future, some of the more prescriptive details of these would then be fleshed out. So as I mentioned earlier, so a little bit of an art in terms of how descriptive to get in these different category descriptions. I think we try to take these further than maybe what we've seen in some of the precedent counties that we reviewed in terms of providing more guidance and descriptions than maybe typically what we've seen from some of the other precedent counties. The second document that we've sent you is a framework of the plan principles and the goals of the plan. So we've outlined 7 plan principles, and then for each of these a principle statement. And then as you go through these, for each principle, there's a vision metric, trying to outline in terms of kind of one more of a visionary type metric to really kind of focus attention in terms of perhaps what could be achieved, through this principle and through the results of the goals. Doesn't necessarily mean that there wouldn't be other metrics involved. We're trying to kind of create a sense of hierarchy in terms of maybe what are some of the most important things to come out of these different principles. And then for each of the principles, we have then 3 or 4 goals, and then accompanying actions, strategies beneath those. Again, I'm kind of a big believer in terms of trying to be as concise as possible. Trying to keep these, again, 3 to 4 goals, per principle. Sometimes when plans really start to expand with a lot of different goals, it's hard to kind of then keep focus, and then folks kind of wrap their arms around moving things forward. So we're trying to keep these, again, as concise as possible. Right now, this is very much a framework. As we start to get into then feedback from the committee, feedback from the open house, we'll start to fill in more details and some context to these as appropriate. But we're looking kind of for feedback in terms of just the overall framework of this, in terms of the principles, goals, and then vision metric for each one of these. So hopefully this has been helpful in terms of providing you a little bit of context in terms of the materials that we've sent over. As you'll see in your email, we have a brief survey. Again, it would really benefit both us and then I think other committee members if folks could take that by the end of next week. We'll share the results back and help kind of shape the content and agenda for the meeting on the 9th, kind of based on back on what we hear from the survey. And again, the reminder of the next committee meeting on Tuesday, July 9th. So have a great weekend. Have a great 4th of July, and we'll look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, July 9th.